Welcome back to Pentatonic Scale Mastery Volume 3. Today, we're going to expand on what we already learned in Volumes 1 and 2, so no need for a long introduction, but if you missed Volumes 1 and 2, be sure to check those out and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any more content. We've been learning the pentatonic blues scale patterns in C major and its relative minor A minor. Now, in the first lesson, we learned the pentatonic blues scale pattern number 1, usually the first scale that every guitarist learns. And in the second volume, we learned how to combine that with the next pattern up the neck from that, this one. Okay, and we learned the chord patterns that these were relating to as well. Okay, so let's go down the neck for volume 3 and learn the pattern that exists on the other side of home bass pattern 1, okay? Now, this pattern looks like this. Okay, and just like before, we can view it as major and minor. So this should be starting to become old news to you. So we have to figure out how to view it in major and how to view it in minor. Now, if we wanted to view it in major, C is our root and it's going to relate to this C major chord form. And now every lesson I want to slowly add new concepts on, maybe introduce a new way of thinking about things that you haven't thought of yet. So for this, I really want to take the time to show you how these chords exist within the pattern. It should be very apparent to you how that pattern just fills out around the chord. That chord sits nicely in the pattern, and the pattern is almost built around the chord. It is built around the chord, but it should be very easy to see the chord form existing in that scale pattern. So if you're not there yet, make sure you spend some time visualizing that chord form existing in the scale pattern. Write the pattern out on paper. I used to do that tons when I was a kid, just drew out diagrams by hand for guitar fretboard necks and then just filled them in with patterns, scale patterns, and started circling notes so that I could see the chords that existed within those patterns. So that's a good exercise to do. So if we were viewing it from major, C major in the A major form is the chord form that we need to think of. And if we were going to view it in minor, our A is down on the 5th fret, and it actually a little bit of a wonkier bit of a chord. It's the G major shape, but we have to make that a minor so that we can view it as an A minor chord shape. And we do that by barring the top 3 strings with our pinky. We can grab the E out here with our first finger and get the A. And then that's A minor in the G minor chord form. Now, before we get into making some music with this and learning some musical ideas, we have to get our arpeggios out of the way, right? We need to always remember the 3 things we need: the scale pattern, the chord form, and the arpeggio. So let's cover the arpeggio of our major and minor chords now that we know the forms. So starting with our major, we've got that C major in the A major chord form. So our root is here, and we can add the 3rd, the 5th, back to the root, 3rd, 5th. That's really all that we have unless you want to stretch. You can add a 5th underneath it. So there's our arpeggio. Okay, and our A minor arpeggio is going to look like this. So now that all 3 pieces of information are out of the way, let's start stringing it together and making some sense out of the fretboard. Now we've got 3 patterns to work with. It's getting much harder to visualize and move all this around at the drop of a hat than it was with 1 or 2 patterns. So the first thing that's really key to moving these patterns around is seeing your roots. You have to be able to visualize your roots, and that's key to seeing chords too. So if you have an A major chord form, the first thing that you need to have pop in your head at the very least is your roots. So you're going to want to see these 2 roots. They should just pop out at you. And now these roots are what is overlapping, right? You can see these in the G chord form that exists after the A. That root on the 5th fret of the G string is overlapping. And then we've got these two roots on the outside strings overlapping to get to that E form, right? So we've got all these roots. Right? You should just go over those over and over and over until those start making sense. And you can start seeing the chord forms around those roots. So you should have that A root pattern memorized, the G root pattern memorized, and the E root pattern memorized. Now, to start getting around, we can string our chords together. And if you do what I told you and visualize the chords inside the scale pattern, then you can actually be practicing the scales at the same time you're practicing these chords. Strum the chord and see that scale pattern. Move up, strum the next chord and see that scale pattern. Strum the next chord, see that scale pattern. Then when it comes time to play these scale patterns, it's not so bad. So then you can start stringing these together. Now you also want to do the same with A minor. I know, it's a lot of work. Well, you got to do it though. Okay, so A minor, and A minor. Those are the 3 A minors that we're going to string together. We've got A minor in the G chord form, A minor in the E minor chord form, A minor in the D minor chord form. Okay, and once again, you want to visualize those root patterns. So a G pattern is a G pattern is a G pattern in terms of root positions or the root pattern inside that chord form. So the A minor in the G minor form, those roots are the same pattern as when we had a C in the G pattern in the first volume we covered that. So we've got that root pattern for our A minor. We've got for A minor in the E minor form, we've got that root pattern, the same as was in our C major E pattern. And then in the D minor pattern, we've got a root pattern that looks like that on the 4th and 2nd strings. Okay, so once again, visualize all these patterns again as they revolve around the A minor chord. You're just visualizing the exact same 3 patterns. Don't let it confuse you. You've got your A minor in the G chord form. That's our new pattern. You've got your A minor in the E minor pattern. And you've got your A minor in the D minor chord form. Okay? So we've talked about linking the scale patterns, playing up one, down one, up the other one, and reversing that concept. We've talked about linking the chords, and now we have to link those arpeggios. So here we go. Starting on our C, we're going to have 3 C major arpeggios. And starting on A, we're going to have 3 A minor arpeggios. In volumes 1 and 2 of this video series, I gave you some great methods, such as sequences, to get these patterns under your fingers if you're brand new to them. One thing that I skipped over though, that's very important, is playing all of this stuff in time. The arpeggios, the chord forms up and down the neck, playing all this stuff to a metronome, even writing down your progress is very important. Not only is it important as a technique builder, but it's also a good motivator and shows you exactly where you're at and where the gray areas are, what you need to work on. For instance, if I got my metronome clicking and I could confidently play this, and then right about there I start thinking, what's next? And then, oh, I'm off, right? So, oh, that's too hard, let's shut the metronome off and let's just practice like this. right? Now that might be good for the first couple of days while you get used to that scale pattern, but if you're consistently practicing like that, where is it really getting you? You're not playing in time, you're not going to be able to use anything. You want to get it to a point where it's where you're in control of it at all times and you can play it fluently up and down. Now, let's get into using these patterns a little bit. So I left you last time with the repeating pattern concept, where we had in the middle two strings, we had this friendly little pattern that repeated up on the top two strings, right? And that was a G, A, C, and D, and then that repeats an octave up, and we can link that with a little linking note. Well, we can do the same thing down an octave too. We can go G, A, C, D. And we can link all three patterns together with that same shape. Now, experiment with this pattern in your own playing and see where you can go with it. It's a great way of moving in and out of scale patterns and through 2 or 3 of them, but don't feel obligated to go all the way through that repeating pattern or down every single time that you want to use it. You can start low, maybe do a little melody, and then slide with that repeating concept pattern, slide into the next scale pattern. And then do it after you've done a little melody, then slide up again. And finish off your idea that way. So you can get a little more mileage if you play around in the scale patterns before you use it. Speaking of repeating patterns, you might have noticed that if we took the middle 2 strings of that pattern that we just learned today, well, it's the same as the top 2 strings of the pattern beside it, the scale pattern number 1 that we learned back in volume 1. It's the same pattern and the same notes because it's the same idea, just octaves apart. So you can connect those. And once you become aware of these repeating patterns, they're everywhere. And they're pretty cool to make licks out of. So experiment with that. But another thing now that I want to talk about is just creating your own sound, your own style. Just experiment sliding in and out of these patterns and making licks. You don't have to use these repeating patterns exclusively. Once again, thanks for joining me in today's lesson. If you've made it this far, you're making some real progress, so only 2 more patterns to go. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Keep practicing and rock on.